Motorsport has always operated within a contradiction. Engineers push to build the fastest machines possible, then rule-makers scramble to slow it down. Formula One has lived inside that tug-of-war for decades, from fuel limits in the 80s to active suspension bans in the 90s. And in 98, Formula One once again collided with that paradox. The tyre rule that tried to slow F1 down.
All seems to be going smoothly when disaster strikes at 125 miles an hour. Lavey's Mercedes collides and blows up.
In a sport obsessed with speed, cars were becoming too fast, too dangerous, and the limits of human reflexes were being pushed to the edge. Or so the FIA thought. To make F1 safer, a radical solution was introduced. Slick tyres were banned, and grooves tyres became mandatory. Further changes, such as narrowing the width of the cars and altering the shape of the chassis, were also brought in, sold as safety. The FIA wanted to slow the field, to tame the sport, and it worked, for a while at least. Lap times dropped, but by mid-season, some teams were as fast as ever. So, what happened? Why didn't the changes work? And how did a rule designed to slow the sport down actually end up accelerating it?
The Arbus track, Berlin. Start of the German Grand Prix.
From an engineer's perspective, trying to slow down a sport that's built on speed is sacrilege, but safety was getting harder to ignore. The FIA had good reason to step in. Between 63 and 97, Formula One saw 16 driver deaths and 27 serious injuries, and that's only during championship events. Peterson, Villeneuve, Senna, all perished on track, proof that even the greats could get caught out. The trend was clear. Cars were faster, cornering loads heavier, and tyres wider than ever. With grip rising year after year, something had to give. The sport's governing body felt forced to intervene, to stop things from getting out of control. In 93, they reduced the maximum width of a car's slick rear tyres from 18 to 15 inches. But still, it wasn't enough. Lap times kept falling. Teams simply worked around the restriction. If the FIA really wanted to slow Formula One, it would take something far more drastic. So the FIA hatched a plan. At a meeting in Monaco on the 6th of December 96, the FIA World Motorsport Council voted in a series of sweeping rule changes, including some of the most extreme changes the sport had seen in a long time. Their announcement regarding tyres was blunt. With a view to controlling the performances of the cars, the following regulations will come into effect. All dry weather tyres must incorporate circumferential grooves square to the wheel axis and around the entire circumference of the contact surface of each tyre. Front dry weather tyres must incorporate 3 grooves and rear dry weather tyres must incorporate 4 grooves. The FIA technical delegate will monitor wear of tyres, and after use, at least 50% of the length of each groove in every dry weather tyre must be evident, unless the absence of a groove is due solely to abnormal wear caused by damage to the car. In short, grooves, 14mm wide at the surface, tapering to 10mm, cut 2.5mm deep, spaced 50mm apart, and arranged in a symmetrical pattern. Theoretically, this would reduce the tyre's contact patch, the amount of rubber making contact with the ground. The FIA claimed circa 12%, meaning less grip, especially during acceleration and cornering. The FIA saw grooves as an easy way to regulate grip without further reducing the overall size of the tyre, opening the door for more or less grooves to be added as they see fit. And the tyres weren't the only target. New rules also slimmed the overall width of the cars from 2 meters to 1.8 meters, and now they must pass even more stringent safety checks, specifically regarding the cockpit and brakes. The rules would come into play for the 98 season, creating several challenges for drivers and their head-scratching engineers. Max Mosley, then FIA president, stated, "The goal was to reduce cornering speeds and improve safety." But there were also several secondary objectives. The theory was that by making cars harder to drive, it would place much more emphasis on driver skill and improve the overall quality of racing. It was also hoped that there would be more overtaking. Since the cars were skinnier, there'd be more room to maneuver on the track. The FIA sold it as a reset. The paddock didn't buy it. Not after the first tests anyway. Jacques Villeneuve, fresh from his '97 World Championship, was one of the most vocal critics. After testing the new tyres for the first time, he described them as dangerous and likened the experience to driving a Formula Ford car with a bit more power and downforce. Villeneuve was never one to mince his words. He went on to say, "Instead of still being the ultimate sport that it is, it's going to become more of a show and a circus." Villeneuve also predicted that the cars would be uncontrollable going into corners and that braking distances would be no greater than they were before. Earlier into the season, he was proved right about control. In '97, 7 cars went off the track in the 3 practice sessions before the opening race in Australia. In '98, that number doubled to 14. Average lap times were down by around 1 to 2 seconds, although the FIA had expected them to be down by up to 5 seconds. Still, they thought they'd succeeded, but they'd underestimated what a tyre engineer could do with a bad rule. In '98, there were 2 main players in the tyre game, Goodyear and Bridgestone. Goodyear was well established, having entered the sport in '64, and they were the sole supplier of tyres for 5 years between '92 and '96. Bridgestone were new, entering F1 in '97. Competition had been lacking since the legendary tyre wars of the '80s, when companies like Pirelli, Michelin, and Avon Rubber all battled for supremacy. But the new rule changed everything, sparking a new tyre war that would end with only one winner. Goodyear started with a big advantage. In '97, they had the big teams, Williams, Ferrari, Jordan, Sauber and Tyrrell, whilst Bridgestone got the scraps, Arrows, Prost, Stewart, Minardi, and Lola, who didn't even make it past one race. Although Goodyear teams were still winning, Bridgestone cars started showing up in places they weren't supposed to. They started achieving surprisingly good results during the supplier's first year. At the '97 Austria Grand Prix, Jarno Trulli led for much of the race while driving for Prost. Unfortunately, his engine failed, but afterwards he called the Bridgestone tyres a trump card and the major reason that he was able to dominate. Damon Hill ran at the front in Hungary with a great performance in his Arrows Yamaha before suffering a hydraulic problem in the final laps. Team boss Tom Walkinshaw said the Bridgestone tyres were really strong. That alone told the paddock Bridgestone weren't just tourists. McLaren and Benetton were on the Goodyear list that year, but switched to Bridgestone for the '98 season when the latter proved that they weren't just there to make up the numbers. The tyre war wasn't just technical, it was political, with McLaren going head-to-head with Ferrari and Benetton squaring off against Williams. And there were big benefits to changing suppliers.
In 1997, Bridgestone is taking up the challenge of Formula One.
While Goodyear was set in its ways, focusing on preserving its tyres and repurposing old carcasses instead of maximising grip, Bridgestone had no such legacy bias. Its tyres were specifically designed for the new grooves. Bridgestone's new tyres were softer, with carcasses fine-tuned to deform under load, reducing the impact of the grooves on performance. Meanwhile, Goodyear's tyres proved to be stiff. They overheated often and were inconsistent. Bridgestone had effectively found ways to get around the new rule. Their tyres were technically legal, but when the grooves deformed under load, they functioned like slicks. On the books, grooved. On the track, slicks. The FIA couldn't accurately measure deformation at 180 miles per hour, and in Parc Fermé, the tyres passed. And the engineers didn't stop there. Every second the FIA tried to claw back, they found ways to reclaim using clever setup tricks, lowering tyre pressures to flatten the contact patch, running high negative camber, tilting the tyres inwards to scrub grooves out of the contact area, preloading suspensions so the tyres flexed into compliance. Mechanical grip may have been reduced, but engineers worked tirelessly to claw it back. Then the top teams decided to buy back even more with aero. The late 90s were the era of peak tobacco money. McLaren had West, a German brand of cigarettes. Ferrari had the backing of Marlboro. Jordan ran with Benson and Hedges. And of course, Bar, British American Racing, was literally named after British American tobacco. An influx of sponsorship led to big budgets. Big budgets meant big departments, unlimited staff, unlimited testing. At the time, there was no cost cap, no wind tunnel restrictions, no CFD limits, and no homologation freeze. The FIA may have closed the front door with a tyre rule, but they left the back gate wide open. Teams took advantage, expanding their aero departments, bringing in more wind tunnels, testing models at a 60% scale, and obsessively optimizing barge boards, diffusers, side pods, anything they could. Ferrari's chief designer, Rory Byrne, even admitted at the F399 launch, the F399 is an evolution of the F300, but it's also a totally new car. Overall, the design and suspension have been redesigned for Bridgestone's tyres. The new goal? Cars that worked in clean air only. Following got harder, leading got easier. There's a certain irony about tobacco companies funding the push for cleaner air. But the FIA didn't care, or rather, there wasn't much they could do about it. At least until 2006, when tobacco advertising was banned in Formula 1 under pressure from the EU. Anyway, the thing that mattered the most was the money. It was put to good use, and the hard work soon paid off. The proof came in just the 12th race of the '98 season, the Hungarian Grand Prix. It was Ferrari versus McLaren, Goodyear versus Bridgestone, Michael Schumacher versus David Coulthard. Under the guidance of Ross Brawn, Schumacher opted for a 3-stop strategy, rather than the 2 stops favoured by both McLaren drivers. He had a light car, clean air, and soft tyres. Schumacher raced into the lead after his second stop on lap 43, and extended his lead to ensure that he had enough time to make a third stop. By lap 52, Schumacher was flying, beating Coulthard and setting times that matched 97, in a narrower, grooved tyre car. The FIA's slowdown rule had been beaten in half a season. In the end, it wasn't close. Schumacher pitted a third time and still won by 9.4 seconds. His performance proved grip hadn't vanished, it had been shifted from tyres to aero. It was an embarrassment for the FIA. The tyre rule that was supposed to slow these cars down, emphasise skill and improve racing, instead increased aero dependence, made following harder, and reduced overtaking. In less than one season, the rule hadn't just failed, it had reshaped the sport entirely. Unbelievably, the FIA doubled down the very next year. For '99, 4 grooves at the front to match the rear. But the damage was done. The path was set. Mechanical grip stayed strangled. Aero took over. This would usher in a whole new set of problems, kicking off the dirty air era, reducing overtaking, and generally making racing worse, not better. Engineers learned a new trick, burying performance in side effects, wake turbulence, tyre flex, suspension tricks, instead of raw mechanical grip. As for the tyre companies, for Goodyear, the writing was on the wall. After 30 years in F1, rising costs and shifting rules forced them out. This left Bridgestone as the sole tyre provider until Michelin came back in 2001. Full slicks didn't return until 2009, closing the chapter on a rule that reshaped Formula 1, just not in the way the FIA had intended. In the end, the grooves didn't slow Formula 1, they just moved the arms race sideways. The FIA tried to outsmart 300 engineers, and now you know how that story ends.